Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
All right, we are discussing the issue of child abuse, and it's leading into an discussion of sexual abuse as well later. But if you remember on Tuesday, we started our discussion looking at the line, as it were, between child abuse, which we know is evil and wrong, and what do we do with the discussion of corporal punishment, spanking. Majority of us students, and I don't know about the rest of you that are visiting, were raised in homes where corporal punishment was used, was administered. It's something, my conviction is that I do think it to be right. I think Scripture does teach there is an appropriateness to corporal punishment. If you remember that line from the article we read, that discipline always, spanking sometimes. You need to be willing to know your child. I mean, with Zach, all I have to do is look at him and, I'm sorry, and that's all it takes. Where with Elias, he's one of those cast iron bottoms, right? It's like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Throw him to the alligators. Maybe that'll, no, I don't throw him to the alligators. It takes a little bit more tough love with him, but they're different, right? And I, as their father, need to know the difference, but not be afraid to use the rod, as Proverbs calls it. Appropriately, never in sin, but knowing that it's actually a good thing. That it's done not so much just for the child, but it's actually for me because I'm lazy, because I don't think I need to engage, or I'm overly sensitive. We went through all those topics and discussions. My main argument is that I do believe there are times when corporal punishment is appropriate. Never that it should lead into abuse or sin, but can be used as an effective means of discipline and showing proper love. So today is the other side of that argument. When and where is it inappropriate to have any physical contact with your child, which is known as physical abuse, child abuse, sexual neglect? What I want to do first is go through a video that kind of talks about, it's only about 20 minutes or so, but it highlights some of the areas of concern as it relates to this issue of child abuse. Just yesterday I was talking to somebody. It's actually a different conversation, but we got talking about Christ's word in Matthew chapter 18. He's talking about the faith of children and how wonderful it is that they come with such childlike faith. He talks about how we need to be like that if we want to enter the kingdom of heaven, to be like them in that regard. Whoever receives one of such as a child in my name receives me. But then he says this in verse 6. Because if the stuff up here doesn't bother you people, I've seen this video a dozen times. It should bother us, right? It should. He says this in verse 6. But whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me to stumble, be better for him to have a heavy millstone be hung around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Jesus himself says that person needs to be drowned if they cause one of these young ones to stumble. It's just that serious. And to me, the reality of that, you can Photoshop these tears out later in the video, so. The reality of that is exactly why I want to train you guys to know this, to deal with it in a very clear way, so as to identify it, to report it, to, Lord willing, then get help. Because we're talking about little ones that are very important in the eyes of God. I have only a couple of copies for you ladies. I think there's about 5, so those of you that want to share, feel free to. Nevertheless, trying to make that encouragement. The first article I'm giving you here is dealing with physical abuse. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but enough to give you an idea. That video kind of chronicles a lot of it as well. goes through how it's defined. Again, some of the realities that are part of that, what neglect and abuse and sexual abuse is on the second page, some statistics that deal with that as well. Some definitions, examples. Again, all things that you guys really need to consider. The effects of child abuse, abusers, and again, understand as they were saying in the video again, most abusers, both physical and sexual abuse, are known to the children. Most often within family or churches or school environments. These are people that the kids know more often than not. People they trust, right? So it's that trust that unfortunately then leads to the abuse, and whereby we need to kind of identify that. Especially with kids and physical abuse. Again, a lot of the physical signs are things that you need to be aware of. Again, the bruising, the marks, and I thought it was helpful as that detective was talking about that, the specific areas that you need to look for. Again, that it's not common for a kid to continually fall on his face, right, and bruise the side of his face. It's not normative. Do kids do that? I'm sure mine have, right? But if you're seeing that pattern over and over and over again, that should be a sign. This is like all the other issues we've talked about, right? With suicide, with eating disorders, with all these other areas. If there is an inclination, if there are warning signs that you're observing, I'd much rather you make the assumption that something is happening and do something about it, rather than not make the assumption and find out that there really was something going on. It's just that important. And so you need to know what those warning signs are, the physical signs, the realities that play into that as well. I do want to spend a little time discussing the sexual abuse reality as well, because there's a certain progression, and again, both are a heinous evil before God, there's no doubt. In my opinion, not that I'm trying to classify sin, but there is something even, I would believe, even more grievous regarding sexual abuse of a child. The confusion of intimacy and relationship coupled with the abuse and the maliciousness of sexual abuse carries with it another level of evil with it, in my opinion. Nevertheless, this does kind of progress itself in certain ways as well, and I kind of wanted to go through that. Again, it goes through definitions, examples, what it looks like. What I want to go through is on the second page, the progression of the act, kind of how sexual abuse starts. How does actually an individual be part of this? What's the progression that, again, I think is helpful for you to be aware of so as to then better help children or others that may be part of this as well. The progression of the act. Often, first time, it starts with what's known as the approach. This individual, again, this activity is an intentional act, meaning that the offender wants to do this. They're known to the individual, and they usually feel that they can do this because, again, the child knows them. There's a trust. There's a certain amount of camaraderie that's already apparent within the child and that individual. So therefore, that person feels, in whatever sinful state and thought they're in, that yes, I can now engage in some type of inappropriate sexual activity. And again, going to the definitions on the page before, that can be a multiple number of ways. That can be fondling, that can be exposure, that can be having sex in front of that child. I mean, there's multiple ways in which sexual abuse is defined. Sometimes it's not just against the child, sometimes it's exposing the child to certain reality of a sexual nature. I mean, all that falls in line of what sexual abuse is. Nevertheless, there's this initial response. Again, not that I'm asking you to imagine the scenario, but most often abusers don't come announcing they're abusers, right? They don't come, hey, I'm here to sexually abuse you. How do you think they would usually start? With a little child. How would they approach, how would they initiate that with a child? In what context do you think? Play. More often than not. Little kids like to play, right? Just last night, my sons and I, we were playing our own little version of Rock Band. You know, we got our guitars out, and I was on the drums, Mom was on microphone, and my boys love it. They love engaging in that type of activity because they're doing it with somebody they trust. It's exactly how an offender does it. Hey, do you want to go play a little game? More often than not, it's a game that doesn't involve anyone else. It's a game, and it's a special game. If you tell a kid, hey, do you want to play a special game? How do you think the kid's going to respond? More often than not. Yeah, not just, sure. They'd be like, oh, a special game? Great, let's do it. And the very thing that abuser is using, trust, is the means by which they bring abuse to the child. The kid trusts that individual. They say, wow, they like me so much, they want to have a special game. And they've now perverted that trust to bring abuse into that child's life. And so it's not a direct, here, I'm here to abuse you now. It's usually done in the context, false context, of some type of playful interaction, which then is usually private, where the individual then can engage in a very inappropriate sexual behavior towards the child. That's usually how it starts. There can be the direct violation, the very frontal, taking this kid, abusing them. More often than not, it's more towards the context of some type of trust play that's established with the child, all right? Which then leads to the sexual interaction. And again, as defined on the previous page, sexual interaction is not just the copulation between an adult and a child. Sometimes it's molestation, sometimes it's exhibitionism, sometimes it's exposing that child to sexual pornography or sexual intercourse of others. That all is defined under the umbrella of sexual abuse. And so nevertheless, the first approach then leads to that sexual interaction. Eventually leads then to secrecy. Why does the abuser want to keep it a secret?
Not exactly something to be proud of.
Not really. You know what I find so interesting too? Almost 99% of the time, I've yet to find, unless they are an incredibly sociopathic, pathologically inferior person, most people that are abusers know they need to keep it a secret because they know it to be wrong. They know that this is not right. Yet they obviously have engaged in it, so it's not wrong enough for them to actually stop, but they know it's wrong enough because what are they fearful of?
Other people finding out.
Exactly, and therefore the consequences of it.
Would you say that also maybe that they're fearful that if it's found out that it will stop and they want to continue?
Oh, that's definitely part of it too. The ability to keep it secret perpetuates the ability for them to continue this sin.
But
Yeah.
it's not just that they want to protect their reputation, it's also that.
It's both. It's both. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to, get into the public limelight of the situation, and they want to perpetuate their sin. Let's be honest. We may not do it in this way, but we all do this in our own ways, right? We perpetuate our sinful ideas, thoughts, behaviors, and we keep it under wraps, i.e., we don't keep accountable to other people, so we don't look bad to other people, and we can continue doing it, right? Unfortunately, in this situation, it's not just yourself, it's now affecting another person as well. And so often, they continue the game metaphor with a kid. Okay, you want to play a special game? They engage in the sinful behavior, and eventually they tell the kid, listen, this is our little game. Don't tell anyone else about it, okay? This is our special game. No one else can have it. And again, the hope is the kid thinks, wow, this is our special, I gotta keep it under because he said it's our special game. At least that's the hope of the offender. That in order to hide their sin, they thus tell the kid it's part of the game. You're seeing how the sin expands, right? Remember David and Bathsheba? Sin of the eyes leads to sin of the flesh, which leads to sin of the hand. He sees her, he wants her, he sleeps with her, but that's not enough because when she conceives, he then has to take care of Uriah the Hittite. Gets him home, hopefully he's tired, sleeps with his wife. Doesn't gets him drunk, hopefully that's enough to gets him dead. And the sin continues to get bigger and bigger. And that's exactly what we see in this situation and in all situations when sin is not dealt with in a very clear way. Secrecy then leads to usual disclosure then. The disclosure is usually on the part of the child, and more often than not is not intentional. The disclosure of a child, because understand what's happening. The kid is told that this is a game, that this is a fun game, that this is a special game. On the surface, are games usually good or bad? Good, right? A kid is being told that this is a good thing. But what is happening to them? Is that a good or bad thing? Bad. Verbal, it's being told it's good. Physical, it is bad. There is inevitably a conflict in that child. They know, they may not cognitively know, but they know at some level what is happening to them is wrong. It is evil. There is a conscience within us. We are made in the image of God, that when certain activities, both in physical and emotional realities, are present that are dishonoring to God, there is a conflict that inevitably arises. The kid was told it's good, but man, this doesn't seem good. And inevitably what happens is the disclosure of the child usually comes out in an accidental way. You're talking with them in youth group, you're having discussions at Sunday school or at church or whatever it is, and they inadvertently slip out their special game with that person. Or when they had to do that in front of the video camera, or when they had to do whatever it is, that it's an inadvertent slip. They don't come out, because when they let it out, what more often will they do? If they accidentally let it out, what were they told they were supposed to do? They were supposed to keep it a secret. And more often than not, that's exactly what they'll then try to do. Oh, I let the information out. I wasn't supposed to, because that person told me that this is our special secret. And so when and if you hear a child say that, I do this special thing with so-and-so that you know is not right, and all of a sudden you see they're trying to backpedal and pull all that information back, because in their mind, oh right, I was supposed to keep this mine. That's a big warning sign for you. That's something you need to be very aware of, that all of a sudden, especially for a kid who doesn't have the well-developed masks that you and I have, right? They don't know what it means to, let it out and then try to keep it in, where you and I do that all the time, and we're really good. No, I didn't mean to let that out. I can lie my way through all this stuff. Kids don't have those well-developed masks that you and I unfortunately do. And so that much more, when you see that, be very aware of it. They let it out, and they're trying to get it back in. So at this point, you need to be very clear when you're seeing these other warning signs. And again, like all the other things, if you're just seeing one thing, maybe not in itself. But if you're starting to see a confluence of things, emotional realities, behavioral realities, relationship is affected, physical realities, and then that much more verbal realities, guys, understand there is too much on the line for you to sit silent. You need to report this. You need to know within your state, within your region, who are the authorities, whether it be the local sheriff, whether it be the police department, whether it be Child Protective Services. Again, there's always the concern that some have, well, are we going to put a family in danger? Is there a possibility of making things worse? To which I answer, most likely it will. Things need to get worse before they can get better, because there's so much sin and evil that's happening to this young child. But look who the priority is. Because our hope is that it doesn't go to the 6th level of repression, but that it truly goes to recovery. I was at a camp in California a couple years ago, speaking out there, where we found out this young girl in one of the cabins was being abused. There were signs of physical abuse. So when we started asking questions, sure enough, we came to the realization that yes, this young girl had been physically abused. Camp director made it known to the Child Protective Services within that county. Steps started taking place. Now, what was so interesting is that this young girl got saved at camp that week. Right? She's coming from this horrendous background, sees the gospel of Jesus Christ, and gets saved. Unfortunately, we had to start the process. Let me change that. Actually, I think fortunately we started the process of identifying and starting the help. When she came to knowledge, when they started dealing with the mother got saved eventually as well. That all of a sudden the gospel, through this horrendous event, is now wonderfully working through the life of this girl, the mother, and who else knows, in some way. That when they took the initiative to engage, the power of God was seen in a wonderful way. You not doing anything, dare I say, you need to read Matthew 18 again if you don't do anything. Can I be that clear? That you, in some ways, are held culpable as well.
Is there any difference in how you deal with something that comes up that happened maybe quite a long time ago?
Sure. Yeah, good question. Really, the best standard we have is where they are in age. If they're 16 years old and it happened when they were 4, legally speaking, you're still held obliged to report that because they are still a minor. Yeah. And I think I told you guys a situation I had one time. I was working at a clinic in Dallas where I was working with a female. She was probably in her 30s. And she told me of some abuse she had earlier in life. And being kind of a new therapist, and I was actually still in my internship, I was like, oh, I don't know, do I have to report this? I don't know. And I told her, listen, I'm going to talk to my supervisor. I don't know if I have to report this or not. As soon as I said that, whoop, walls went up. She's like, no, you can't report this. No. And she left, and I asked my supervisor, do I need to report this? She's like, no, in fact, you don't. It's not required. Obviously, we want her to get help for it and maybe, remove herself if she's still in that environment or seek help in other ways, but there's no legal requirement that when she's an adult to report something that happened even when she was a minor. Unfortunately, that woman never came back. She was so afraid that I was going to expose her and the secrets that she had. Nevertheless, that's kind of the marker, the delineation as to when and where we do have to report. So literally 18. Yeah, that's a good question. Not much more in understanding the necessity of quickly dealing with this reality. This article goes on to discuss, again, after the ways in which it goes, our hope and desire to identify it. So it goes through signs of sexual abuse, both in appearance and behavior, the caretaker's behavior, the one that may be abusing as well, the effects of this as well, both not just for the child, but also into adulthood as well. I think you heard it within the video, that oftentimes those that have been abused become what? Abusers. That's not a one-to-one correlation. That is not a genetic reality. But remember our adage, you're not determined by your past, but you are affected by your past. You can't blame your abuse of children. Well, I was abused, so therefore I had to abuse. No, you're held accountable to that. But you can understand why they may get into it, right? You may understand that the cycle of evil that perpetuates. That's part why I wanted you to do these genograms, to help you understand certain cycles within your family that you can, for the good, praise God for the bad, ask for the grace to break it, right? That's the whole point of us looking at those 3 generations of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that we want to, with joy, praise for the good cycles, and with grace, ask for hope to break the bad cycles, knowing that we are affected by our family. Another camp I was speaking at in New York, situation came in. to talk about the evil of how people think. Child was brought to camp by the parents, and they in New York physically examine, at least visually examine each child before they start camp. Not like a body search or anything, but just look for certain signs that they can see evident in everyday wearing. And sure enough, the nurse saw some signs and evidence of child abuse. And when they found out more, when they reported it, the first day of camp, okay, so this is not like throughout the week, the first day of camp they reported it, they found out, get how evil this is, the parents had been abusing the child, brought the child to camp with the hopes of implicating the camp in the abuse, and therefore having litigation to sue the camp for any damages. Just shows you how evil people think, that they'll even abuse their own child, use their child as a means of saying, oh yeah, I put my kid in camp and you must have abused him, so they give me $1 million. How wicked we are in this world, and how much more aware you guys need to be within whatever ministry you may find yourself in, so as to identify and bring hope and care when needed, right? My concern for the camp was there, my concern for the parents, but my primary concern was for that kid. To see how they were abused on multiple levels, not just physically, but emotionally as well, to be used as this pawn in the parents' game of trying to get some compensation, how sick that was. Nevertheless, the ability to know how to help and to care. This last article is, again, what needs to happen. Let me say very clearly, more often than not, your job as people helpers, as those that are not professional counselors, which some of you may go on to get your master's degree, become a social worker, become a professional counselor that deals with that. More often than not, though, for those of you that are going to be people helpers within your church camps, you need to refer this issue, right? This is not something that is normative within the scope of people helping ministry. The issues and the parameters of care are so great that, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, this is not something that should be dealt with by a youth pastor, by a Sunday school worker, a camp worker. That's not to say you can't be part of it. In fact, I want you to be part of it, especially as you being the primary identifier. But there needs to be a greater community of care. There absolutely needs to be other professionals brought into this. Obviously, legal parameters need to be brought into this as well. So as soon as you suspect this, there needs to be an opening of a network, a referral. If and when you take my ethics course, we get into this a lot, the need to develop a good referral basis before these things happen. Because if you wait when they happen to find out who do I talk to, you're wasting time at that point. You need to have that set up before it happens. Nevertheless, let me be very clear. Your primary job in that instance, if and when it's suspected and identified, is to open up to referrals of professional and legal jurisdictions. That doesn't mean you can't still be part of the process. In fact, I would argue that you still need to be part of the process, but in a very direct way. And that's what this article I've given you is. It's titled, What Loved Ones Can Do for Those Who Are in Abuse. And essentially, I would argue that you're one of those people helpers that loves this child, that cares for them, and wants to still be there for them. They go through a number of issues. We're all unique individuals. He highlights these survivors need to be loved and accepted. Understand they have conflicting ideas. They have these people who say they love them, but then they do these things to them. And I forgot to bring it, and maybe I can do it on Tuesday. There's a movie called Good Will Hunting. Have any of you ever seen that movie? It's a powerful film. It's a hard film. There's a lot of language and crassness in it, but there's this one scene where Matt Damon's character, it's a powerful scene where he's talking to Robin Williams, who's the therapist, and they've gone through multiple times of meeting together. And Robin Williams is reading his file and sees pictures of the many times he's been physically abused himself. And he's going through and he's showing them this. And Robin Williams, he says, they start discussing, and he finds out that Robin Williams has been through physical abuse as well. They start talking, and Robin Williams puts down the file. He's like, you know what? This isn't you. Matt Damon's character says, yeah, I know. I mean, he's this tough South Boston kid. He's this tough gang kid. Like, no. You got to understand, this is not you. Yeah, I know. This is not your fault. Yeah, thanks, I know. No, hear me say this. This is not your fault. All of a sudden, Matt Damon starts getting defensive. He's like, okay, that's enough. Robin Williams keeps saying it. This is not your fault. He's getting angry now, and he starts cussing at him. He starts pushing him. Stop it, not you too. And Robin just keeps on saying, this is not your fault. And he just breaks down. He just comes to the reality that for so long, this has been his identity, right? That he's been in such an abusive reality for so long that he's had to be this tough guy that beats up all these people on the streets at a whim. And that, again, he's not determined. That's not a justification for his actions, but it's understandable why he's such a jerk, because so many people have been a jerk to him. It's a powerful scene that really shows how one of the best things that you and I can do is really help them know that their abuse is not their defining identity. God can use it still, right? And I can't tell you how many glorious stories I have of people who have come through abuse that have used that part of their story as a means of talking about their life, and more importantly, the glory that is given to God. It's a wonderful story that can be used. It is part of them, but it's not all of them. We need to help them understand that, to be loved and accepted. They need nurturing. They need to be believed. They need to know it wasn't their fault. Again, there's the idea that maybe I brought this on myself. Maybe I wasn't good enough. And this scene goes on. He talks about how, we as kids, when Dad came home, we all had to be really quiet. And we didn't look at him in the eye, and we made sure his food was ready. And there was this one time when the potatoes weren't perfectly aligned to the meat. And so I probably deserved it then. No! But do you see how warped the thinking has gotten for this little kid to think that potatoes touching meat means that I deserve to be beaten? We need to let them know that it's not their fault, that the standards by which they're under are irrational. And as such, the abuse is that much more of a horrendous thing. They need to break the silence. They need professional help. It goes in to talking about encouragement, that you're there for them, knowing that you're going to be there for them. And again, I'm not going to go through and read through every point of the article, but I'll leave that to you to do. That's the best thing you can do. First, report. Open up the network of referral to both professional and legal entities. And secondly, be a support yourself. Be there to help them and journey with them as they're dealing with this horrendous evil that's happened to them. But it's not unknown by God. This is what I love about this, right? This is not something that blindsided God and said, oh, I'm sorry that went through and I kind of messed that one up. He knows this, and he uses this in such a glorious way that brings him that much more glory. And the joy that we have is to help them understand that in the journey, right? To let them know that this is not identifying them as who they are, but it is helping them to understand a better reality of who they are. That yes, you are broken, and you live in a broken world with broken people. Good news, the gospel, God works his best with broken people. I'm living evidence of that. So are you. And so to me, that's kind of the biggest joy, especially working with victims of abuse. Questions with any of that? I mean, that's a lot of information. I know it's very sobering information, and it should be. It should hurt, okay, because of the evils that we deal with. But it's good to know there's hope, right? A number of years ago when I was the dean here at the college for a year, and I was just finished with dealing with another student issue, whether it was discipline or counseling, I don't remember, but I was just beside myself. I mean, literally in tears with my head in my hands. Dr. McLeod walked by and saw me. He knocked on my door, and he came in, saw that I was struggling, and I was relating to him some of my concerns, just how heavy my heart was in dealing with issues, right? This is a reality that you guys are going to have to deal with. There's a lot of joy, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of heartache too. And I remember him saying two things. He said, well, it's always good to know there's hope. That we as Christians, more than anyone else, know that there's hope. But it's good to know that you hurt. Because if you don't hurt, if it doesn't bother you, I'd encourage you to get right with God. That this should hurt you, that this should bother you to some degree, that it's not just, oh, you have abuse. Here are the 5 steps to help you deal with your abuse. If this doesn't affect you, if there isn't an emotional reality in terms of who you're dealing with, I would argue you need to find out why that to be the case. And I know it's different for different people, right? I'm a little more vocal in my emotional realities. And for someone else, they may be a little more reserved in their emotional release. But nevertheless, there should be a reality, nevertheless, to both personalities. It should hurt, but there is hope. 2 realities that I really needed, and that I'm glad my friend gave to me, that I would encourage you with as well, especially in these very sobering discussions.